Would you pay me £750 for this? Probably not, and I wouldn't blame you, but what if I told you that this alien-looking clay sculpture is the artistic embodiment of my authentic self? Not my literal self, but for me, this sculpture is as close to my soul as I can possibly get. It's my purpose for being on the planet and my authenticity in material form. Doesn't really change anything, does it? You still probably wouldn't pay £750 for my first clay sculpture, but why is that? Actually, I know why. It might be because you're more of a literary connoisseur, so how about some of my finest poetry bound together in a beautiful leather volume, healing works, mystically inspired, equally authentic and arguably of a higher caliber of artistic expression? Would you pay me £750 for that? Again, I'm trying to illustrate a point. What is the connection between financial viability and authenticity? We need to have a wide-ranging and multi-layered conversation about how to earn money from our creativity and how to have creative, purposeful careers while also being aware of the outer world. We need to separate out this idea that authenticity is king or authenticity is queen, and that's all you need to focus on. It's a very complex question, and it goes deep into the core of trauma psychology and issues around self-identity, so we're going to need a pretty wide-ranging question to frame out the remainder of this video. Unfortunately, I do have one of those, so I'm going to bring it up for you on the screen, and this is going to be quite a roller coaster of wide-ranging discussion. Bringing this up on the screen now, fantastic question. My therapist suggested that we move on to working on my money mindset in relation with my trauma healing. There's a deep connection to wealth and self-worth for me. I feel like I don't deserve a lot of money. Working as an educator, this belief is deeply ingrained, and when I do get money, I tend to feel guilty for it, because I know there are a lot of people out there who need it more than I do. Thank you for speaking on this. I'm very curious to learn more about how to work on this mindset in relation to my creative work that I want to put out into the world eventually. Fantastic question, touches upon the main points of self-identity, wanting to do meaningful and soul-inspiring work in the form of, interestingly, both educational work, but then this idea of creative work may be something that I can relate to as someone who is a creative person, but primarily I am more of an educator with a focus on mental health, trauma psychology, and self-actualization. I make my money through mentorships and now through my latest course, the Shadow Work Library, which I might talk about later, but not for the sake of now. We need to unpack some of these key questions so you can learn if this is a path which is meant for you. And it's something which is very, very, very triggering, and if I do step on a few landmines of shame or guilt or low self-worth, please know that I'm not attacking you personally. I've worked with, at this point, multiple dozens of people in private mentorship spaces where a key aspect of the work that we're doing together for 4 months is either entrepreneurial expansion or creative expansion. Usually the two of them mixed together. These are people that are starting social medias or expanding their social medias. They're making new businesses or expanding their business, and they're trying to find a way to take what they feel on the inside and turn it into a lifestyle which matches. They want to close the gap between work which isn't fulfilling them and work which is deeply fulfilling, money that's not paying the bills or not providing the lifestyle, and money which provides for everything, but there's a very, very, very wide gap between those realities, and unfortunately, we need to take a bit of a grounded, humble, and quite sobering look at the difficulty of making it as a full-time creative. I'm going to focus on this idea of creative work, and this could be anyone who's doing physical products or digital products. If you're a more conventional artist, a painter or a writer or a musician, or if you're more of a modern artistic type and doing things like graphic design or otherwise creating various business-oriented adjacent kind of creative services such as copywriting or some kind of video editing, how do you make this work as a full-time career? Fundamentally, you need to separate out the conversation into two distinct elements. You've got the internal conversation about self-worth, and self-identity, which goes into trauma psychology. And then you also have a business conversation about entrepreneurship. I'll start with the entrepreneurship conversation first because it's an easier conversation to have. Fundamentally, you need to be willing to put in consistent daily or at least weekly practice on building a business which makes sense and has something which is worth money. To be a full-time creative, you need to embrace the fact that you are also a business owner. Your personal brand is the thing that you're putting out into the world, and the most successful modern artists that we see, or even people that are just living a couple thousand per month, comfortable lifestyle, full-time creative work, they've put a lot of attention into their marketing, their sales, their online presence, and their networking. Usually a focus on their online presence and their branding, their visual identity, but also their storytelling. There's a whole conversation about the entrepreneurial skills. I've read so many business books on this myself to try and figure this out. You just need to be prepared that it's not going to be this special creative journey where you get to be truly yourself. You don't get to be your authentic self as you're beginning the business aspect of the creative journey. We're going to come to the authenticity and the trauma and the self-identity in just a moment, but you need to accept that for several years, at the very beginning, and maybe even 5 to 10 years into your creative career, you're going to have to make compromises about how you want to work, how you want to spend your time, how you want to promote your services, and also, crucially, the kind of service or product you actually create. I've worked with so many people, different coaches, different creatives, musicians, people who make physical products, people who make artistic products with paint or watercolor or drawing. There's so many different types of artists that I've worked with, and they've all had to make the compromise. You don't get to just make what you want to make and think it's going to pay the bills. This is my first sculpture. The reason why it's not particularly amazing is that I picked up clay sculpting one morning and I really wanted to make it happen. A couple of weeks I started working on the clay and I just didn't have the time and the energy because of my actual business, which is this, doing the trauma therapy and the self-actualization all blended together. This is my actual core creative work. It didn't work because I didn't put in the work, but even with something like my poetry, and I was writing consistently, I think between the period of about 2017 to 2019, I was writing more or less every single day. The reason I even began an Instagram page in the first place was initially as this idea to amass a following to sell my first poetry book. And over the course of my traveling years, going around Europe and backpacking and working on farms and learning technical skills, I had this interesting lifestyle, some might say, of working on farms with animals, building things, construction or land work, and also being a bit of a traveling poet. I had an interesting early 20s. Did it pay me? Never. Never once did I earn any money from my poetry, despite the fact that I was writing for 2, 3, or sometimes on the weekends, 4 or 5 hours in a focused, fervorous, passionate burst of authentic creativity. Some of the poems I shared with you at the start, they do mean a lot to me. They're mystically inspired, self-healing poems. I know I'm a good writer. I'm not the best poet in the world, but I try and do my best to honor the old forms of conventional rhyming mechanics and different couplet styles. I tried my best to learn the craft, and I also spent years. I think I spent probably at least the 2 years when I started the Instagram, building Instagram through consistent posting, through all of the engagement strategies, and I built to, I think, like 2,000 followers over 2 years while sharing my poetry and my traveling, and it still didn't make any money because it's not a profitable business unless you are truly exceptional or you tap a certain market and tap a certain style at a certain time. Poetry, especially a poetry collection, is not going to make you much money. This entrepreneurial aspect of my creative, authentic journey just never had a good beginning to even rely upon. You sell a poetry collection on Amazon for maybe $10, $15 if you want to push it. You get about half of that. If you're thinking of monthly expenditure, how many poetry collections are you going to have to sell per month? And what scale of audience do you need for them to actually really care about your poetry enough to buy an actual paper-bound collection? It's very, 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 very difficult. For most crafts, this is the same for music, for people who are having albums or EPs or even going to concerts and gigs. It's a whole nother world. Same for artists, same for people who are trying to do performance art in theaters or shows. The entrepreneurial aspect, even if it's fundamentally developed as a key focus in your life, you're putting in the work. Really humbling moment in the video. You're putting in the work. You're like me. You're putting in the hours to make Instagram posts, engage every day on social media. You're reaching out to other creatives. You're liking and commenting and networking these old school Instagram growth strategies. It still didn't lead anywhere, despite me putting in the work for 2 years. But why? Crucial question over here to swap into the trauma psychology and self-identity work. It's understanding that there's a massive difference between creative work that you do for yourself and creative work that's actually meant for other people. When people are healing their old wounds or they're moving out of limited identity constructs of being the kind of person who works a certain dead-end or boring job, the kind of person who has unfulfilling romantic relationships, or maybe the kind of individual who doesn't really feel engaged with what's going around. You see a disenchanted world, a grey world of consumerism and shallowness, and why don't people just have the deeper conversations about the really meaningful things in life? I get that energy. If you're that kind of person, I get that energy. But are you creating for you, or are you actually creating for other people? 95 to 99% of the creative work that I've seen in private mentorship spaces is about the person self-therapeutically resolving something for themselves. And I know because almost all of my poetry fits in exactly that category. There might be a secondary byproduct of people enjoying what I've read, and people being like, wow, that actually touched me, and that aspect of the golden shadow, self-actualization, that particular verse, that really spoke to me, and I'm going to go hit the gym today, or I'm going to go and make the business deal, and I feel inspired and some practical change. Art can be deeply powerful, but just understand the difference between art that you make for you and art that you're trying to present to the world, because you need to understand the difference in subjective versus objective reality. It's a deep conversation. Let's open it up and go a layer beneath. If you're working on issues of low self-esteem, maybe like today's questioner who was talking about this issue of feeling guilty around money, and this is a whole nother conversation on money wounds and money psychology. I've dealt with this topic a few times on this channel. In fact, only just a few weeks ago, I released a money psychology video exclusively. That's a whole aspect of the overall self-healing, creative, authentic conversation, which will significantly impact your success in not only being able to produce consistent creative output, but also feeling the confidence to be able to share that in the world without feeling like you're taking up too much space, or maybe you don't even deserve money for this in the first place. You could have the best possible entrepreneurial business framework. Let's imagine I gave you 100,000 motivated followers, not just followers that see a post and then disappear and they're ghost followers on a page. I mean people who are actually ready to buy from you. If you haven't resolved those internal blockages around being worth the money that's coming your way, and your creativity being something that you actually want to share with the world, as opposed to a mood or a sentiment that takes you along. You're walking out in the forest and you see a beautiful sunrise, and later that day you start painting, or you start writing a poetry, or start writing a few verses, and you make it into an artistic thing that week. But then over the next month you do nothing. That's more of a sentiment-based creative flow that isn't really very consistent. It has deep value. It has deep meaning. I don't want you to think that I'm devaluing creativity overall. But the mood and the sentiment and the flowy, I'll do it when I feel like it, that's all about you. If you create from that place, it is about you, and it's a selfish endeavor. A soulful selfish endeavor doesn't mean that selfish is bad, but the selfishness of I'm creating for me can also be met with the selfishness of I deserve money for this, and I would also like to make a lot of money in my lifetime, ideally through things that mean a lot to me, like my creativity. But the money wound conversation is almost sitting at a side angle for the creative, authentic lifetime career of entrepreneurial authenticity conversation. They're both going to be worked through together. As I've built my business online, I've spent the last 2 years doing YouTube as one aspect of my business consistently every single week, 2 videos per week, and now for this year, doing 3 videos per week. I've learned what it takes to block out my timetable and put in the hours at the entrepreneurial level of managing my business, managing my workflow. But if I had all that in place and I still didn't believe that I was worth listening to, I'd show up on camera and you would click off within the first 25 seconds. You'd feel that it wasn't authentic. You'd feel that I didn't actually want to be here. And you'd also feel if I'm trying to talk with you as an individual or if it's all about me. And this is an interesting psychology moment, and you won't be able to unnotice this when you see this. Notice how in these videos I try and really keep it as individualistic and one-to-one as possible. I don't say things like this. Imagine if I did this. Okay, guys, what you need to do to improve your creative self-esteem is you need to focus on this. And okay, guys, all right, everyone out there, my audience says this. There are all these people in the audience. The language structure changes. That wasn't a perfect example, but things like okay, guys, referring to a collective rather than referring to you or my audience. It's all fundamentally this self-absorbed energy of me. And some creators online go through that. They don't pay attention to language in the same way that I do. But because I'm more therapeutically oriented and I like working with people one-to-one, it's very natural for me to have this you and me conversational energy rather than me speaking to a lecture theatre. When I watch people trying to expand on social media for the first time and we're working together in private sessions and they're building out their capacity to speak to camera, people do all kinds of things. They do this. They'll be looking at themselves in the camera and I'll say, okay, guys, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how to have a creative... I'm so self-conscious. If I'm looking over here and speaking to a collective versus looking at you and speaking to you, massive shift. But the psychology behind that is that someone who's not necessarily confident in their creative expression will focus more towards the outside in a way which is uncalibrated, but also paradoxically, they'll be so self-absorbed that they don't know that their creative expression isn't about them. The high-level aspect to start wrapping up this conversation, the self-identity issues, and the guilt and the shame and the feeling of wanting to hide away from the world, and I'm not ready to share my true creativity, and I don't even feel like I'm deserving of the spotlight or deserving of the money. All of those issues tie back to unresolved self-worth wounds, and you can't heal it by going all the way in, and you also can't heal it by focusing all the way outwards. There are many layers and levels to the creative fulfillment pathway, which means shifting between what do I want, fundamentally speaking, and what does the market want? What does the audience want? What do you want? Of course, I would love if on this YouTube channel I could spend more time talking about the exact topics that are selfishly the most important and most interesting to me. And I try and find a balance. This idea that whenever you're a creative, you should almost go into the I do some for me and do some for them, whether that's some for yourself, pure authentic expression, and some for the audience. And you'll see this in people who are established creatives, especially musicians or artists or performance artists. They have an element of their work which is about their personal creative expansion and their identity formation, but also they're aware that money talks and they do need to play to audience tastes. There's a reason why I start these videos in almost the same way every single time. I'm doing a strong emotional invitation and I'm simplifying towards greater complexity as the video goes through. Because if you've seen me multiple times, you're already familiar with me, but if this is your first time seeing me, what happens there is that I need to speak to your needs. I'm not going in at my level of what I want to talk about. I'm trying to guide a conversation based on your preferences and your reality. And because YouTube is my primary form of creativity these days in terms of speaking, I enjoy speaking, and also there's this theatrical aspect, like when I'm holding up my nice little statue and getting all dramatic, I enjoy performance art. It's why I can do a YouTube channel. It's about me and it's about you. Just know that there's a difference between focusing outwards and focusing inwards if you haven't done the trauma psychology work. It's a different conversation. There's the money wound conversation, there's the childhood trauma, low self-esteem, low self-worth conversation, and then there's a conversation about entrepreneurial creative ventures. You can lay out the foundations and lay out the structures of all your social media and your LinkedIn and your networking, and that can all be there, but it will mean nothing if you haven't done the deeper inner work around the unresolved identity issues. And that's really not got very much to do with creativity or entrepreneurial creativity at all. Those are more issues of attachment and witnessing and self-identity. You'll need to do things like inner child work and also a variety of somatic therapies, which help you to ultimately open up your body. You just want to be in a more confident position overall, but you're also going to have to look at issues where mom or dad, brother or sister disvalidated you for one reason or another. A true creative is tapped into something which is more subtle than most people. It's the job of the artist to peel back the layers and peek into the other realms of emotional subtlety and bring back something in material form which other people can then see and go, ah, that's beautiful, or ah, yes, that's the thing. I didn't have the words for it, or I couldn't paint a picture like that, but that's how I feel when I also recognize that part of me that this artist shared. That's your job. Your job is to share that, but you will neither be able to see at depth nor feel the emotions at depth if you've got trauma blocking up your system, and you won't have the confidence to share that if you haven't resolved the trauma or just fundamentally taken up a bit more space in the world. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to have your artistic expressions out there for all to enjoy, but just take a humble step back to realize that this isn't a flowy sentiment of every now and again you can create something and believe that the people are going to be there whenever you get the mood, whenever you get the feeling of wanting to share something. For the rare creative, that can work, especially with something like social media. But for most people, and every single client that I've ever worked with, you need to show up consistently in a way which offers value to your audience in a genuinely reliable way. And that means you create for them and you create for you. And it's up to you, depending on your medium, to try and find that sweet spot between personal well-being and collective value. The reason that you're not going to pay me £750 for this is it's objectively not very good. You're probably still not going to pay me £750 for a poetry collection, but my course, the Shadow Work Library, is the thing that's over here. That's £750. What a messy advert. The link is in the description. You can see my material. It's not about me. It's about me creating a product, an educational experience, which speaks to the pain and the wounding and the possibility of my audience. I can't escape it. I'm still speaking to a collective. Isn't life fun? I hope this video has brought up a few interesting reflection points for you. You can leave a comment down in the comment section if you have any particular expansions around this creative personal fulfillment and niching. And I apologize that I can't give you a more direct solution because I would just be lying to you otherwise. You can't sustainably go out into the world and build a creative career without a business mind and also a significant degree of self-identity healing and high confidence, because this is a multi-year process and that's your journey. But I can support you if you leave a comment down in the comment section. We'll keep opening up this topic, and I'll see you over here on the next video in the meantime.